slideshow. So today we're looking at crash recovery and coping with setbacks and relapses. I'll introduce myself first. For those who don't know, my name's Ben Wickens. I'm co-chair of Stop for ME group. I've got both ME and long COVID. I'm also a volunteer of long COVID support. I'm one of the moderators for one of the Sunday peer support sessions. And I offered to do these sessions for long COVID support because I've been coping myself with ME for 10 years. And I've also, in that time, well, not too long after getting ME, a year or two later, I became co-chair of the Stop for ME group. And in that role, I've supported a lot of people around issues with pacing. So a lot of people here with long COVID rather than ME. Now, about half of people with long COVID seem to have ME type fatigue issues. Often I'll talk about PEM or post-exertional malaise. A lot of people prefer referring to it as post-exertional symptom exacerbation. I find that quite difficult to say, and I find also that exertion can cause symptoms of a range of other things that are a little bit different from what we think of when we think of PEM. So I sort of often think of post-exertional malaise or PEM for short as sort of encapsulating everything. Now, when we sort of look at definitions of what we sort of think of as a crash, I use a narrower definition than what's more generally used. So I'll start off by sharing the general sort of definition, but bear in mind sometimes when I'm talking I'll use something quite a bit more narrow because in my head I mean something a little bit more specific. So this is from Bateman Horne Centres. They've put together a crash care survival guides, and really one of the best recommendations from today is that if you can cope with written information and absorbing things in writing, that you go there and have a look at it. It's really good, it's really well put together, and it's intended for ill people. Bateman Horne have done some really good resources, but some of them are quite high level and not ideal for everyone, but this is very much designed for patients. So they sort of take the sort of quote at the start. So this is where I wish I need to adjust my screen because it's often bits off. Periods of prolonged and severe PEM are referred to as a crash. So that is crashes vary from person to person and episode to episode. Some may be mild, resulting in inability to carry on with daily activities such as cognitive processing or physical tasks. Others can be so severely debilitating it becomes life-threatening due to individuals' inability to walk, talk, eat, drink, or sit upright. Now, when I think of a crash, I'm meaning something more than minor periods of where I'm having quite severe PEM, because I would say I experience PEM to some degree most days, and certainly severe PEM most, every few months, sometimes each month. But I kind of think of a crash as like something that's a little bit more sort of long term, sort of something where I'm sort of getting to a point where I'm basically barely able to take care of myself. So sometimes when you hear me sort of using the term, I'll use a sort of a more sort of narrow, more severe term than is often sort of meant. But whether we're looking at sort of crashes or relapses, we're kind of looking at, if you think of what energy you sort of normally have, which may be enough to, do a few of the things you do, and possibly have a tiny bit to spare, possibly not, and then be in a situation where the energy envelope has shrunk a lot, and all the things that you normally do are just not possible. So what I would say about when I sort of talk about relapses, what I'm kind of talking about is if you look at my sort of ME journey, I started off being very ill, sometimes feeling I was okay, being very ill, sometimes feeling as though I was okay, being very ill, not really quite sure what's happening, and having very little energy and having a lot of horrible symptoms. Then I realized I had ME. I started to rest, I started to pace, and slowly my functioning levels rose. I got less symptoms. I was able to do a bit more, and there'd be a certain amount of things that I would do in a day, certain amount of things I'd do in a week that became, a bit of fluctuation, but roughly constant. I think of, for me, as a relapse as like taking a couple of steps backwards down the stairs and being at a lower level of functioning, having a noticeably smaller energy envelope in terms of what I can do each day. Now, with PET, we all experience it quite differently. And crashes and relapses are very different. So some people, they can go much beyond what they know they can do safely within a day, in terms of experiences. They can go far beyond what they should do and can do, and they will get consequences, but they won't necessarily be prolonged, and they will kind of bounce back relatively quickly to roughly the same level of sort of functioning. Some people, they do a bit too much, and it can take weeks or months to recover. I can remember, there's times where I've done things and I would say it's taken me 6 months to recover from them, something that I did in a day. So in my case, I've got to be very cautious and try to stay within my energy levels, because if I exceed them, the consequences in my case can be fairly severe. They can get to the point where I can't basically look after myself. So I sort of very much try to sort of keep within them. But with other people, it's okay to exceed energy levels, to have crashes that won't necessarily last very long and will enable them to do things that are really important for them to do. So we're all very different in this, and you kind of have to do what's right for you. So when looking at sort of crashes, looking at sort of preventing, trying to prevent, trying to prepare, and trying to accept. So in terms of preventing crashes, we're looking at good pacing, rest, trying to manage our commitments and plan well, so that we're not kind of pushing ourselves to the very edge of what we can do. If something is going to come up that's going to make things harder for us, we maybe sort of make adjustments and in other ways, so that we're not exceeding the energy we have in a day. It's not always possible. And we also want to do some look at sort of preparing. So if you are somebody who, if you could have a severe crash or relapse, that could seriously affect what you can do for a sustained amount of time, then you've got to think, what can I do to set up for that now? So it might be you have family or friends that you kind of train, and they know, okay, when this happens to Ben, I know I need to keep my phone calls short. I will do shopping for them. I will, put the bins out. I will do sort of whatever, or even in some cases, I will shower them. I will wash them. Whatever is sort of right for you, and what support you're sort of able to get. Quite a lot of people have a sort of survival bag where they'll have supplies. It might not be a bag as such, but I think it's easier as a metaphor to think of a bag, even if you keep certain things in the freezers or whatever. It might be easy meals. It might be some people, they're not able in a crash to shower or wash. They might then, there's ways you can use sort of wipes and things to do, like to sort of clean yourself. There's different things you can do that enable you to cope as well as possible with the least amount of energy. Some people might have a box of chocolates in their survival bag because they find the mood goes down, might have extra clothes so they don't need to do as many washes when they're in sort of crash state. It's going to be very, very different for every one of us, depending on what we might be like in a crash, what needs we have, and what support systems we have in place. So in some cases, it may be trying to keep a bit of spare money in the bank account so that if you're not able to work during the crash period, you're not in that sort of situation where you absolutely need to pay the bills. It may be having some sort of money spare so that you can pay for help that you need, even if you don't need it all the way around. It might be something as simple as, paying for sort of a takeout. Whatever you sort of need, having the resources ready so that as much as possible you can take care of your needs. And this is, here I'm looking at relatively extreme situations. With moderate situations, it may be less pressing that you prepare, but it can still be helpful. Depending how you are in these states, it may be different things that you need, but it's just all I'd sort of encourage you to do is when you're not in a crash state, give a small amount of thought and think of, if I was, what, the last time I crashed, what was I like? What could I do now to make it a bit easier for myself there? So and some people I know have wheelchairs that they don't use very often, but they know when they're in a crash they might need. Some have communication aids. In the Bateman Horne guide, it said it has communication aids so that you can use simple cards where you're not able to communicate with loved ones or carers what your needs are as easily. It's things you can sort of point to that can make that sort of easier. So you very much have to adapt it for you, but I would say the keys are things to remember is try to prevent and prepare, and finally accept. Now, crashes are almost impossible to stop. We can do certain things, but it's not always possible. And when we're in a crash, you're getting horrible symptoms that are difficult to deal with. It can feel like you're back to stage one, feel like all the progress you've made over the last 6 months is for nothing. It can be very difficult. And I think there's work that can be done where you're not in a crash, so you're in a position to actually accept crashes can happen and accept and be okay with a crash when it happens. Quite often when people are in crashes, they kind of resist it, they fight against it, they get really upset, they try to fight it, they try to do things that they shouldn't do, and that they know that they shouldn't do. And there's quite a lot we can do just in terms of acceptance, and that's not easy, but it's important. Now, whether it's a relapse or a crash and your energy envelope has shrunk a lot, these are sort of some general sort of practice, sort of bits of basic sort of advice. One is do as little as possible. So when you're in a situation where, this is using my sort of extreme sort of crash sort of terms, where even just breathing and eating and doing the bare minimum you need to do is beyond what you have the energy to do in the day and is going to trigger a lot of symptoms, the general recommendations are to do as little as possible because you're already exceeding your energy envelope. The more you do that by, the more worse your symptoms will be, and potentially the harder it will be for your energy envelope to increase. And it's very easy to sort of, like for instance, some people wear heart rate monitors, and when you're in this sort of state, doing things that normally you do okay, they'll send the heart rate monitor up to the point where alarms will go off, and it can be very kind of frustrating. And I'd encourage focusing on rest and high quality rest. We've done sessions before where we've looked at rest, and actually quite often when we're resting, we're not really resting to the quality that we could be. We might be upset, we might be in pain, we might be focusing on the things that we need to be doing, we might be browsing social media, we might be doing all sorts of things that are not restful. And high quality rest can make a difference. And high quality rest and sleep can be very different. Sleep can sometimes be helpful, but high quality rest that's not sleep can also be helpful in different ways. And sometimes you may need to use relaxation techniques, videos, etc., to assist that rest. It's all sort of personal, also to yourself. If there is an underlying cause, addressing that can sometimes be how people are in a severe sort of crash state, how they get out of it. A few years ago, I got a chest infection, and for a few months, I was just incredibly ill and struggling, and I couldn't cope. I was getting worse and worse. And eventually I sort of got a doctor to come to the house, which is quite hard to do in the UK. And they were just like, "You've got a chest infection. Why didn't you call me months ago?" It was like, "Oh, right." And then a few days later, the chest infection was sort of in remission, and a couple of months later, I was back to normal. But if I'd never actually addressed the thing that was sapping my energy, the problem would have continued. Some other people find they've got chemical intolerances and they're exposed to something that's making them iller and iller, and actually removing that thing that's causing the problem makes things a lot better. And I would encourage people to get the help you need. It's very difficult to ask for help, particularly when often you don't need help, to accept that you need help, and that might be from another person. It might be it's aids and adaptations. It might be something that you ask a favor for. It might be something you pay for. But if you're in a situation where you can't do what you need to do, look to see what help you can get, because if you are doing more than you can safely do, it's going to cost you a lot of post-exertional aids, very probably, and it might make it harder to get out of that situation. It's really important to try to readjust your goals and aims. It's very easy to have a to-do list and not adjust that to what happens when your energy envelope is shrunk. And when your energy envelope is shrunk, the list you had yesterday, a week ago, is no longer valid. Obviously, if you've got to buy groceries, if you don't buy groceries, you need food. It's not just a case of throw out everything out the window, but readjust them to the you are today and the energy you have, so that you're doing what you can do as much as possible that is attainable and sustainable. I think it's really important to be kind to yourself. It may be you've done too much and that's brought it on. Maybe there's lessons to learn, but if you kind of focus on, oh, I should never have done that, it's very easy to just not be sort of listening and being kind to yourself and actually allowing yourself to make mistakes. Environmental issues can make a big difference. Often we're in a crash state, we're more sensitive. Bateman and Crash Guide talks of turning the volume down, but that on life, so that can be background noise, it can be dimmer lights, it can be time off social media, it can be whatever needs to happen to just make life less energy draining and taking less out of you. It's important to be patient. It's very easy to be like, oh, I just want this to be over, but unfortunately it takes the time it's going to take, and patience can really help. And as I've said before, you can need to adapt so that you're meeting the needs you have today. So that's sort of crashes. With relapses, I think of relapses as being a little bit more, you've rather than necessarily severe pain or something like that, but more your energy envelope has shrunk quite a bit, and you're finding what you maybe were doing typically, you can't do that level of activity in a day a week anymore for a while. It sometimes can happen when you're not pacing or resting well. You sometimes think you're making more improvements than you maybe are, and then you need to readjust. Sometimes a big event happens that was unavoidable, and then there's consequences. Other illnesses, emotional situations, even good emotional situations. You can be really, really happy about something, and that can be lovely, but it can also be very draining. Seasonal issues can be sort of issues. Sometimes people have issues with the cold. I got a lot of issues this last winter because of respiratory issues from long COVID. Some people find the heat in summer really difficult. Sometimes unexpected situations. Sometimes it's completely unknown. It's easy to try to be like Sherlock Holmes and work out, oh, this is what caused something. And sometimes we don't know. Sometimes there's not an obvious cause. It's not all. Don't necessarily need to look for blame. Obviously, if there's something you've done that's brought this on, if you can not do that in the future, that would be great. Or do things differently so it's less likely to happen, that would be great. But also not to approach relapses with the idea of sort of like blame, or that you always can know what the cause is, because it's not always possible to know. Sometimes there's things you can do to sort of save on energy that you might not be able to always do, maybe for cost issues. Like you might be able to take out for a few nights but not every night. You might be able to call in favors a few days but not every day. So you might, might ways of cleaning yourself that you don't think are good long term environmental impact wise, but are okay to do in the short term. Things that can save energy can really sort of help. I think it's important to understand setbacks are almost inevitable. Um, you know, that they're not necessarily permanent. Um, and to try to adjust your activity levels so you have, if not energy to spare, you're at least not going beyond your energy threshold every day, because it's very easy to try to do what you could do like a week ago or 2 weeks ago if that's different from today. It's not at all easy. I don't want to make light of it, but it's just, it's just, if you think of like a bank account, let's say you get a different job and you get half the salary that you were getting before. You'll have a bit of time where you've got some savings, but ultimately you need to make adjustments because you've got less money to spend. And this is a bit of like with the relapse, you don't know how long it's going to last. Maybe you can predict that by how things have been in the past, but you want to try to make sure that you're not prolonging the relapse or experiencing more PEM symptoms if you can avoid doing so. So sometimes when I've had setbacks and relapses, I find it helpful to start doing activity diaries again. Sometimes it might be where I don't know what's caused things. My life may be different than the way it was when I last did activity diaries. I found this, I've got an 8-year-old daughter. I got ill a few years before she was born. Obviously, my life before she was around was very different than it was when my wife was very pregnant. It was very different when we had a little baby. It was very different when we had a toddler. And each of these sort of changes in the household, they really affect what I do each day. And so I've found I have needed to do activity diaries again, just to kind of keep track and make sure I'm sort of doing good sort of pacing. I think it's really important to listen. When I talk about listening to your body and its needs, I mean body in quite a broad sense, which is different for sort of each of us. But if you listen to sort of what your needs are and try to meet them, it can make a big difference. And I think I don't like the term recovery, because I think recovery suggests, like, oh, I got a cold and I've recovered from it. Whereas I think, in my case anyway, it is a lifelong condition that I'm having to manage. But whatever it is, whatever term you use, recovery isn't linear. It's not sort of 2 steps forward, then another step forward, then another step forward. It can be 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 4 steps forward, 1 step back. And sometimes it might be as we do more things, we see problems that we didn't know were there. But setbacks as well, they're not always fair and they're rarely easy. But it's accepting that and coming to terms with it is tough, but it can make a big difference. So that is a sort of a very sort of quick overview of sort of looking at recovering from crashes and setbacks and relapses. It's a lot to take in on a fairly short session. I tried to keep the sessions to about 25 minutes, half an hour. I did want, as this is the last session in this batch, draw attention to a few resources I recommend. Action for ME have a pacing guide. It's free. You can Google search it, or other search engines will get you there. It's a good PDF guide, and whilst it has its faults, it's a bit out of date. It, as a single document to help someone learn the basics of pacing, it does a good job. Recent published book by somebody relatively local to myself, the Fatigue book by Lydia Raleigh, is one of the better books out there on post-exertional malaise. So again, if you want something else to sort of look to, I would recommend that. I am looking to try to set up some closed groups. So the idea with these is that there'll be smaller numbers. There'll be more about not me talking, but people sharing experiences, more doing things like activity diaries and looking at those together. Just finalising details with the admins of Code Support. They'll hopefully be starting soon. And if you're interested, keep your eyes out. They will get posted when it happens. I would also stress that long COVID support is a great place to ask questions and share experiences. And quite often, if you're having a problem, somebody else will have that problem too. And quite often somebody else will have found things that work for them. And it might be that their idea doesn't work for you, but it might get your mind thinking of something that will. It's very easy to get stuck in oh, there's nothing I can do about this. There's not a way around this. And then just seeing that someone else has found a way of overcoming an issue, their solution might not be right for you, but it might help you find something that is. So peer support, I think, really is invaluable because we can learn from each other without having to do everything ourselves, and it can make a big difference. I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording.